Bruce Purkey, what's in the box right now? What did you watch?
Kid Detective, which I don't think I wrote down who specifically suggested this, but I know Peter Beta was quite a champion of this movie, so probably I first heard about it because of him. Directed by Evan Morgan. I didn't write down the year on this. I want to say it's 2020, 2019.
2020.
Ah, good. Thank you. Stars Adam Brody as Abe, who is the kid detective, and a few other people. I'm not going to list them all. You can look it up. Look at IMDb. You'll figure it out. This is quite an interesting movie, and we talk about tone. This is a movie where I think the changes in tone are really well handled, but I could see some people having problems with it depending on how it plays for them. The basic concept is this. The Adam Brody character is now an adult, a young adult. He's like late 20s, early 30s. I don't know how old he is. Kind of still hanging on to his kid detective lifestyle, but he was at one point kind of one of these, like you'd think of, like a Hardy Boy or what are the Encyclopedia Brown or something, right?
Yeah,
he was the
right.
kid that was precocious, and all the people would come to him and say like, "Oh, we can't figure out who stole the candy money from the school," and he'd be like, I know who it is. I'd solve it. And they have a whole little flashback sequence where they show him solving all these clues, but there's little hints that they don't always work out quite right for him. Like one kid comes to him and says, it's like, "I want to figure out why there's blood on my dad's car." And like in the middle of this sequence, and you see the flash immediately of the police taking his dad out. And you're like, oh, I guess they don't all play out like nice and wholesomely. Anyway, you kind of go through this whole little montage. And then you find out that about the time he was just becoming well known around the community and well loved for all of these things that he solved, all these little mysteries, a young woman has been kidnapped from the community. And because she was his, quote, secretary, she was like 14 or 12 or something, and he was like, I don't know, 15, everyone figured like, well, he's going to solve this immediately. And he never did. And now he's an adult, and, it's kind of haunted him that this girl was abducted and presumably killed and lost and never solved. And it's been kind of this darkness upon him. And he's drunk now. He's kind of living as a 30 whatever year old he is, like living with a roommate. He kind of still has a detective office, but rarely anyone shows up. He's got his goth secretary who doesn't even want to talk to him. And, all he's getting is like, find my missing cat once in a while, stuff like that. And he's kind of a loser. That's the kind of way he's presented as. And he feels like he's a loser. And a young woman shows up and she says, "My boyfriend was murdered and I want you to solve it." And so begins an actual mystery, an actual chance for him to, I guess, be what he, live out his potential, right? This is quite an interesting movie because I would say for the first half of it, I thought, well, this is kind of this lighthearted mystery, sort of neo-noir. Yeah, neo-noir, but very lighthearted. There's a lot of subtle humor in there. I thought for a while, for the first half, I thought, wow, this movie's going to be kind of like a Big Lebowski for me, right? Like the first time around, you're like focused on the mystery, but it doesn't really matter. But the second time around, you can really enjoy all these interesting interactions that you get with various people as he's trying to solve the mystery. And he's also kind of interacting with people from his past who dismiss him as an adult. But boy, oh boy, does the last third of this movie kick it up a notch. And the mystery does end up mattering. And the way this plays out is fantastic. And it really, and once again, I'm obviously not going to give it away. This is one of those movies where it's really an interesting trick because usually the mystery has you hooked and you want to get the solution and it either satisfies you or not. But it's kind of rare to have a movie where the mystery isn't really interesting to you until it is interesting to you. And when it is solved, it actually makes everything you saw before more interesting. And that is a very, very cool trick, I think. And I think this movie pulls it off in spades. And by the end of this movie, you're like kind of blown away of like, wow, that was quite a movie. It's not bright and happy like the beginning. And there's some real darkness in this movie. And there's some really real emotional stakes in the journey for the character too. I kind of ended up loving this movie.
Yeah, this is directed and written by Evan Morgan, and I was blown away. I haven't seen it for about a couple of years. It was released in 2020. Thank you for that, Eric Holmes. But it's one of these things. I feel that it's one of those, right, Bruce? Hidden gems still? It continues to be a hidden gem, possibly?
Yes, because I think it's one of those movies that you can't tell from reading a synopsis or looking at it kind of what it is. And I can imagine a lot of people like me, like you, watching the beginning of it and kind of just maybe not finishing it, or maybe just thinking like, oh, I kind of know what kind of the movie this is, and you don't. So yeah.
I definitely want to actually rewatch this movie. It threw me sideways too with the third act, what was going on.
Third
And
act is amazing.
for you, Eric, I think you'd love it too because it's really well written. A lot of things.
Really well written.
Yeah, it is. So, what is your rating on The Kid Detective?
I'm 4.5 stars. I could probably go 5 stars on this pretty easily. I definitely want to get a rewatch to this in the next couple of years, and I bet you it'll go up for me because this seems very tight, very well written, and I feel like this is one of those movies. If you watch it again, it would have a really interesting rewatch because it's one of those context movies like The Sixth Sense or something. Like once you know everything, you can watch it again, and I bet you there's a lot of little details and things in there that really add up. Also, I want to say we talked about, I'm not going to say it, well, we talked about MacGruber in ours, but we talked about paying off jokes in MacGruber in our Patreon. This one really pays off things that are left earlier in the movie. So, for example, and I'll stop after this, there's a whole thing about when he's a kid, he'd have to hide in closets when he'd break into a house to like solve a mystery, and they'd find him and be like, oh, isn't that cute? This little kid detective is hidden in our closet. They definitely pay that off in a really great way in the modern times. So,
All right, so that is The Kid Detective.
This is CinemAddicts.